369 million gallons. That is how much gasoline America burns through every single day. Not across a week, not spread over a month, but in 24 hours. Pour that number into a mental image. If you lined up every gallon side by side, the row would stretch from New York to Los Angeles and back again 17 times over. Hospital generators run on it. Grocery trucks run on it. Ambulances racing to cardiac arrests at 2 in the morning run on it. Farm equipment planting and harvesting the food that most of the country will eat within 72 hours runs on it. Manufacturing, construction, water treatment, emergency response, all of it dependent on one product from one supply chain that most Americans have never thought about for more than the 30 seconds it takes to fill a tank. Consider then the question that no politician, no infrastructure official, and very few economists have been willing to answer out loud. What actually happens the day it runs out? 7:14 on a Wednesday morning. Pulling into the Shell station on the corner of whatever road you take to work, the one you've used so many times your arm reaches for the door handle before the car fully stops, everything looks normal. The pumps are lit. The canopy is on. The prices on the sign have not changed since yesterday. Taped to pump 4, a piece of white paper. Out of regular. Pump 7 has the same paper. Pump 2, the entire regular island. Around the back, a contractor in a work truck sits with his engine off and his coffee cold, staring at an identical sign on the diesel side. He has been there long enough for the coffee to get that way. Across the street, orange cones block the BP entrance. A handwritten note inside the glass door reads simply, "No fuel." 2 notification banners appear on the phone before your neighbor even finishes dialing. Then a third alert. Then a fourth. Standing in that flat morning light, none of the alerts need to be read. The parking lot itself is already the answer. 48 hours earlier, the Colonial pipeline, the single largest fuel artery on the East Coast, moving 100 million gallons of refined petroleum every day to 50 million Americans, suffered a catastrophic structural failure at 3 junction points simultaneously. Not a cyber attack, not a hurricane. A physical collapse of aging infrastructure that engineers had flagged in federal safety documents going back 11 years, described in language that grew progressively more urgent and received progressively less attention in each budget cycle that followed. What comes next requires understanding something most Americans have never been told about their fuel supply. Gasoline does not sit waiting in reserve the way money sits in a bank. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve, the emergency stockpile the government invokes in exactly these moments, holds crude oil. Raw, unrefined crude that must be transported to one of approximately 130 refineries operating across the country, processed through a multi-stage distillation system, separated into fuel fractions, graded and blended to meet octane specifications, mixed with required ethanol additives, moved again through secondary pipelines or by tanker truck to a distribution terminal, and finally dispatched to gas stations. Under normal conditions, that entire process takes 3 to 6 weeks. Gasoline sitting at a pump right now arrived through a supply cycle with almost no inventory buffer built into it. Refineries process petroleum on a continuous basis because they have to, not because there is a national reserve of finished gasoline waiting somewhere. At any given moment, the entire United States holds roughly 26 days of total petroleum in its pipeline and storage system. A serious, sustained disruption to refining or distribution capacity does not produce a shortage in 3 weeks. It produces one in 3 days, 6 in the morning on day 1, and the story breaks nationally. 90 minutes later, lines at every functioning gas station in affected regions stretch to the sidewalk. Some stretch to the street. A few extend past the next intersection entirely. What makes this early phase genuinely dangerous is not the shortage itself. It is the psychology of the shortage. Fear moves faster than supply data. And in fuel crises, fear alone can drain a region dry. During the 2021 Colonial pipeline shutdown, a ransomware attack halted operations for 6 days. No gasoline actually ran out in that time. The pipeline was partially operational within 48 hours and fully restored within a week. Despite this, 70% of gas stations across the Southeast ran completely dry from panic buying alone. Before a single drop of supply was actually lost, people filled garbage cans, bathtubs, plastic shopping bags. Demand from fear consumed existing supply faster than any real shortage ever could have. That event had a known end date. There was a press conference, there was a map showing restoration progress, and a timeline people could hold on to. Nothing like that exists this morning. No official announces a repair schedule. No one confirms when normal supply will resume. Just empty pumps, a phone full of alerts, and silence where answers should be. Fistfights break out at stations in Charlotte, in Phoenix, in the outer suburbs of Indianapolis by noon. Outside a station in Katy, Texas, a man produces a weapon at a pump. One by one, station owners pull their staff inside and lock the doors. Not because their tanks are empty, but because they can no longer guarantee physical safety in their parking lots. Georgia's governor declares a state of emergency at 2:47 in the afternoon, the first official acknowledgement from any elected official that this is no longer a regional fuel disruption, but a coordinated national crisis. 11 more governors follow before midnight. Before morning, the National Guard is mobilizing in 4 states simultaneously. Trucks are the part of this scenario that almost no one considers until it is too late. Across the country, 3.5 million truck drivers move 72% of all national freight. Diesel fuel, itself a refined petroleum product drawing from the same fractured distribution network, powers every single one of them. As shortages deepen, trucking companies do not halt all operations. Instead, they rationalize quietly, redirecting available fuel toward the most profitable short-haul routes serving urban centers. Long-haul refrigerated runs to rural areas, regional distribution hubs, and smaller markets get deprioritized first. The decision is financial, made without announcement, and its consequences show up in grocery stores before anyone in government realizes what is happening. Most people have never been told this about their food supply. A standard supermarket carries approximately 3 days of food inventory on the floor at any given moment. Not 3 weeks of stored supplies in a back room. Not a meaningful emergency buffer. 3 days of fresh refrigerated and dry goods cycling in and out on just-in-time delivery schedules that assume, completely and without exception, that trucks always arrive on time. On day 3, when long-haul delivery begins to falter, those shelves start emptying. Bottled water disappears first, always. Rice and bread follow within hours. Canned goods, flour, and anything shelf-stable go next. Produce sections are bare by day 4. Refrigerated cases begin warming on day 5 as deliveries of perishables stop arriving entirely. By day 6, anyone living more than 30 miles from a major urban distribution hub faces a genuine, serious problem obtaining basic food. Rural communities, places with a single grocery store and no alternative within 40 miles, cross that threshold a full day ahead of everyone else. Ambulances are what almost no one thinks about when imagining a fuel crisis. 8 to 12 miles per gallon for an average unit. Fire engines average 4. Police cruisers burn through a full tank in a single active shift. Emergency services maintain fuel reserves of 3 to 5 days for exactly this kind of scenario. After those reserves are gone, dispatch centers begin making internal decisions about which calls get a full response and which ones get a unit running on whatever is left. The process is not announced. It does not appear in any press release. It happens quietly in briefing rooms across 300 counties simultaneously. Rural fire departments in 3 states begin informally capping their response distance at 5 miles by day 6. Not as official policy, as survival arithmetic. A finite supply of diesel, more active calls than fuel to reach them. On the morning of day 7, a 67-year-old woman in eastern Kentucky goes into cardiac arrest at 11:22. Response time from the nearest unit with adequate fuel is 26 minutes. She survives. The cardiologist who treats her will think about the margin for a long time afterward. Multiply her story across 240 million Americans living outside walkable urban centers, and the arithmetic of what this crisis means becomes impossible to ignore. Petroleum is not simply what fills a car. Strip away every indirect dependency, and the number that remains is this. 97% of American freight transportation runs on refined petroleum products. Farm equipment using diesel plants and harvests roughly $200 billion in crops every year. Crops with no non-petroleum harvesting alternative at any meaningful scale. Beyond transportation, backup generators at hospitals, water treatment facilities, data centers, and military installations all draw from the same supply chain now fracturing. Garbage trucks stop running, school buses stop. Construction halts mid-project. Refrigerated warehouses keeping food cold lose their diesel generators, while the trucks that were supposed to take that food somewhere can no longer reach them. Manufacturing plants begin shutting down by day 10. Not because they run on gasoline directly, but because their supply of components and raw materials stopped arriving on day 3. Stock exchanges suspend trading twice on day 12 as circuit breakers trigger across every major sector simultaneously. The Federal Reserve announces emergency liquidity measures before markets close. Congressional leaders are recalled from recess for an emergency session that same afternoon, the 3rd time that has happened in American history. Economists place the total GDP impact of a full 2-week shutdown at between $400 and $700 billion, roughly equivalent to the entire 2008 financial crisis compressed into 14 days. Government response would not be absent. Within hours of day 1, access to the Strategic Petroleum Reserve would be authorized, and crude would begin moving toward refineries under emergency order. Military logistics corridors would establish fuel distribution for hospitals and emergency services within 72 hours. Invoking the Defense Production Act within 48 hours, the president would direct private manufacturers and fuel distributors to prioritize emergency supply chains above all existing commercial contracts, a legal override of the private market that has only been used a handful of times in American history. Odd-even license plate rationing, the same system implemented during the 1973 oil embargo, would be announced at the federal level by day 4. Stopping the deterioration entirely requires something that cannot be ordered into existence overnight. No emergency directive creates new pipeline capacity. No presidential order opens a refinery that does not already exist. Built across half a century of policy decisions, the infrastructure that moves gasoline from ground to gas station cannot be meaningfully replaced in days, weeks, or even years, only slowed in its failure. 70 years of infrastructure decisions created a country that cannot function without constant, uninterrupted access to refined petroleum. Suburbs were designed without walkability because gasoline was assumed to be permanent. Rail freight was allowed to decline because diesel trucking was cheaper when oil was abundant. Agriculture was restructured into large-scale operations requiring powered machinery with no viable alternative at scale. A gasoline crisis does not reveal a flaw in an otherwise sound system. It reveals that the fuel supply became the structural foundation that everything else was built on top of, quietly, gradually, and without anyone voting for it directly. This specific scenario has not occurred at full national scale. Consider what 6 days did in 2021. Shortages across 5 states, 70% of gas stations dry, and no actual supply was lost. Consider what 5 months did in 1973. The oil embargo rewrote American foreign policy, triggered a recession, and produced lasting changes to federal energy strategy that are still felt today. Infrastructure vulnerabilities that would enable something far worse than either of those events remain unaddressed. Engineering reports flag them. Budget cycles defund the fixes. The pipeline ages another year. Whether America could survive one day without gasoline is not the question worth asking. How many days before it cannot?